Welcome to join it at 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Y'all, so let me see if I can find this. I used to have this. Yes, I got this audio. We used to play this all the time because you know the pattern of stories. A politician gets indicted. And you can read the entire story and never find the party of the person indicted unless it's a Republican. And then suddenly it's all over. Republican X indicted. Republican X, here are his crimes. Republican X. But if it's a Democrat, you would never know. So just as a play on that, we started this bit of audio every time I would talk about these stories.
It's time for another exciting edition of Name That Party, the thrilling game show where we try to guess the party affiliations of criminal politicians the media chooses not to report. We tell you what they did, you guess the party.
We would play it. We still occasionally would play it if there's a relevant story. But I think we're going to have a new game show sound. It's going to be, hey kids, it's that time again. Let's guess the race. Here's the New York Times. Brutal attack on Filipino woman sparks outrage. Everybody is on edge. Security guards failed to intervene when a man kicked and stomped on a 65-year-old woman near Times Square, yelling, "You don't belong here." The security camera video was shocking in its brutality. A 65-year-old Filipino immigrant was walking down the street near Times Square when a man in broad daylight suddenly kicked her in the stomach. She crumpled to the sidewalk. He kicked her once in the head, then again and again. He yelled an obscenity at her, according to a police official, and then said, "You don't belong here." As the violent scene unfolded in Manhattan, 3 men watched from the lobby of a nearby luxury apartment building. When the woman struggled to stand up, one of the men, a security guard, closed the front door to the building. Even as reports of anti-Asian hate crimes have escalated in recent weeks, the video released by police officials on Monday evening touched a fresh nerve. The sheer brazenness of the attack, combined with the seeming indifference to the bystanders, caused another wave of fear for many Asian Americans already worn down by a steady drumbeat of assaults. "This feels like an emergency happening in real time over weeks," said Chris Kwok, a board member of the Asian American Bar Association of New York. "People are in a state of panic. Everybody is on edge." Early Wednesday, after an image of the man taken from security cameras spread widely on social media and on posters in Manhattan, the police charged Brandon Elliott, 38, with felony assault as a hate crime. Mr. Elliott was released from prison in 2019 and was on lifetime parole after he was convicted of fatally stabbing his mother to death in 2002, the police said. As the video went viral online, the attack provoked a torrent of condemnation from public officials and seemed to underscore the difficulty the government faces in curbing unprovoked assaults against Asian Americans. Hang on. I've gone to, nope. It was a black attacker. I went the entire way through the story. Nope, no reference. In fact, the opening picture helpfully shows several black residents holding up signs saying coronavirus is not Chinese, Asian lives matter. You can see the security camera. There's no reference. There's no reference at all. Now I'm looking. Let's see. Yep. Nope. Let's see. Well, Nope. I'm sorry. There's not. All the coverage of white supremacy. In fact, to be fair, I mean, paragraph by paragraph. Listen, I've gone through here. There is no reference to the race of the attacker. None. And yet here, this is what a New York City official has said.
This is a horrific act of racist violence. It's a deadly pattern. We know what happened in Atlanta, and we know what's happening elsewhere.
Why are people talking about how much
Hey, hold on just 1 second. Asian Americans across the United States have been sounding the alarm about hate for years. These are not new attacks, but the incidents are unrelated. Not a week goes by and you'll hear that something just happened in Brooklyn with a 16-year-old just today. In New York City, there have been 33 classified hate crimes in the last 3 months of 2021, and that doesn't include all the ones that do not get reported. This came from Trump, that's my opinion, but it's been around.
This came from Trump. It came from Trump. Blame Donald Trump for a black man who should be in prison for murdering his mother. That's all they know. It's predictable. A Filipino woman in New York City is attacked on a Sunday. She's heading to church. At least that's what the initial reports were of. I don't know that she actually was heading to church. That was how some initial press reports characterized it, but I don't think that could be the case given the day. In any event, a 65-year-old Filipino female immigrant to the United States was walking down a street near Times Square, and a black man who was let out of prison in 2019 for the crime of murdering his mother by stabbing her to death kicks her, shoves her to the ground, repeatedly stomps on her head. The security guards guess the race. Huh? Any guesses there? What if it was a wiper? What if it was... What if this had been Trump Tower? Can you imagine the coverage if a black man had pushed a Filipino woman to the ground in front of Trump Tower? Can you imagine the media coverage of it? They would have done everything possible to pin it on Donald Trump. And here comes a New York official who says it's just my opinion, but it's all Trump. This is all Trump's fault. You're at a high-end apartment on West 43rd Street in Manhattan. And the people inside the building after this attack, they do nothing during the attack. And then after the attack, they close the front door so the Filipino woman can't ask them for help. Guess the races of the people involved. You shouldn't have to even ask that. You shouldn't have to raise it. But I think we have to, because in the last several weeks, we've been lectured by our betters in the media that it's all white supremacy, it's all white racism. You had the shooter in Atlanta. It is overwhelmingly, definitively now shown there was nothing about race in his attacks. The dude in Atlanta was going to massage parlors to have sex, Asian-themed massage parlors. He was compulsive in his sexual behavior. He blamed these women for the temptation. He murdered them and then got in his car and tried to drive to Florida to murder people in the porn industry. And it was immediately white supremacy. It's white supremacy. It's all about white racism. It's white supremacy. No, actually, it turns out it wasn't. Then you have the Syrian immigrant in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, who opens fire on people. It's white supremacy. I mean, out of the gate, it's got to be white supremacy. It's always the white guys doing this. And then here, what happens? You get crickets. Crickets. No discussion of race whatsoever, just crickets. Why? Because it didn't fit the pattern. This is what happens when you see race everywhere, and then the rules that you create yourself don't apply. But we're seeing this all over the place. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in fact, has an Instagram story up about, turning the border situation into a race situation. Now, you will keep in mind, please, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been nowhere and has said nothing about the border. She characterized it as concentration camps when Donald Trump was president of the United States, and in the last month has said nothing as the situation has deteriorated. Now listen to this.
They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. And that's a problem.
A militaristic frame. Okay, let me just pause here because this is actually very instructional. We talk a lot about critical theory here in postmodernism. People who talk about frames have embraced critical theory, postmodernism. They believe that you, instead of trying to accurately describe a situation, you're trying to construct a situation. You're trying to frame it in a way for others to see. And you must get away from that framing of truth into a different framing of truth to reflect a different reality. The surge is the viral surge is apparently racist and militaristic. No, the surge. What about the surge energy drink? What? I guess that's white supremacy.
Because this is not a surge. These are children, and they are not insurgents, and we are not being invaded, which, by the way, is a white supremacist.
There it is.
Idea.
There it is. Oh my gosh. So here's what the idiot's doing. She's equating the word surge and insurgent. That's all. It's all about the military and white supremacy. This is why we can't have nice things. We have these idiots running amok, trying to set narratives instead of worrying about facts. You can't deal with issues at the border because it's racist. It's racist. Everything about these attacks on Asian Americans are race-based. It's all white supremacy. It's all Trump. And then along comes this guy in New York City. And by the way, if you've listened to this program, I've been pointing this out. The predominant attackers of Asian Americans in this country are young black men. That is a fact. The FBI data backs it up. The number 2 category of attacks on Asian Americans, other Asian Americans. Number 1, though, young black men. I've pointed this out, and I've been attacked for racism for daring to point that fact out. An FBI data point is a fact, but it makes you a racist for pointing out. Along comes the video that shows what's going on. It's a black man who murdered his mother and should still be in prison, but was let out in New York, who stomps on this Filipino woman. And suddenly, we still got to wring our hands about anti-Asian violence, but let's not talk about race at all. Let's not talk about race. It makes you racist to talk about the data or who did it. If there's a white guy, you can talk about race, because who cares about them? But we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Are we allowed to have honest conversations anymore? Because there clearly is a problem, but it is predominantly not a problem of the white community on the Asian community. There's clearly a problem. There clearly is. And it's a bigger problem than just race-based attacks on Asian Americans. You've got a dude who murdered his mother, stabbed her to death, who was let out of prison, who's wandering the streets of New York City and did this. He'll go back to prison for how long? Probably not for life.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show, the perfect blend of
hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. I got to read this piece. Bari Weiss. This is she was at the New York Times and the wokes chased her off because she wasn't woke enough. She wants people to watch the video, and what she says is, did you see the building security guard slowly close the door as the 65-year-old woman struggled to get up from the sidewalk? There are two kinds of evil captured in this clip. One is the evil of the attacker. The other is the evil of the bystanders. The second kind makes me even sicker. The apathy, the indifference, the nonchalance, the passivity in the face of human suffering, as if such an attack is a casual occurrence, as if she is a figure in a video game and not a real human being, shoved and kicked and stomped on. Some have pointed out the guard would have lost his job if he'd gotten involved, that private security guards are strictly barred from intervening in such situations because of liability. I'm sure that's right. According to the building's management company, the staff who witnessed the attack have been suspended pending an investigation in conjunction with their union. But imagine if this woman is your mother. Really picture her. Now picture her being beaten at the point of hospitalization in broad daylight in the middle of Manhattan. And imagine that grown adult men, several feet away, watched what happened to her. If your answer is still but liability, I'm not sure what to say. What's so enraging and heartbreaking of late is that each day there seems to be a new attack and a new video. Here's another, reportedly from a few hours earlier on Monday, which took place on Manhattan-bound J train in Bushwick, New York. According to this tweet and video, which has nearly 4 million views, a young-looking Asian man is beaten and reportedly unconscious. We need the public's help, the New York Police Department Hate Crimes Task Force tweeted. The NYPD is aware of the video and is investigating. Maybe you saw pictures of another subway attack earlier this month in which a Sri Lankan immigrant was viciously beaten on the 1 train in Tribeca in the middle of a Friday afternoon. Or perhaps you read the story the very next day of a man urinating on an Asian woman in her 20s on a Queens-bound train. Joseph Kahn, a music director, video director, darkly joked on Twitter, "I'm fully vaccinated, so technically I have a higher chance of being beaten to death as an Asian on a New York City subway than dying of COVID." But maybe there's another evil beyond the monstrousness of the attackers and the cruelty of the bystanders, and this is the evil of lying about it or purposely misdiagnosing it, the problem to fit the narrative. As Zaid Jilani explained last week, the official media story about these anti-Asian hate crimes is that they are instances of white supremacy. If you thumb through news articles from the past few days or read over statements from leading politicians, you'd imagine that the Ku Klux Klan is responsible for the spree of robberies, assaults, and murders of Asian Americans across the nation. The phrase white supremacy is used repeatedly, he wrote. This narrative is pervasive, but it bears little relationship to the evidence. Not only are none of the high-profile attacks over the past few months white supremacists, many of them aren't even white. Should a person's life matter more to us if they're attacked by someone of one race rather than another? Because that's exactly the calculus we're seeing. Asian Americans are being attacked, and the media and the political class are contorting themselves to find a way to blame white supremacy or the legacy of Trumpism. Why? Because when the perpetrator is a neo-Nazi, it's a moral gimme. When the person carrying out the hate crime comes from a group that's also a target of hate crimes, condemnation becomes much more difficult. The dynamic deserves more of our attention. Now, I'll stop reading here. One thing to note is part of this is because the left has embraced this idea, this intersectional narrative. On the left, embracing critical theory as their thought processes and mechanisms by which to see the world, they've embraced the idea of intersectionality, that people are placed in groups based on their sex, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their skin color, their religious background. You put all these things together, so if you're a white, male, heterosexual, cisgendered, as they would call it, that means you're actually really a dude who thinks he's a dude. You're Christian. Well, you are the proverbial oppressor. And all crime typically can be traced back to your actions, even When another group causes a crime, it's actually because of your influence on that group that causes them to commit a crime. And when that group commits a crime against someone who's on the intersectional trait scale lesser or equal to them, well, it's not really their fault. It's their group has been oppressed by you, the white guy. And so all media conversations have to involve white supremacy in some way because they've embraced intersectionality, and it makes no sense. And it doesn't fit what's going on, but that's what they believe.
30.
It's like at CNN, believe it or not, at CNN, there's a story at CNN. If you get my daily newsletter, you have seen this. A reporter, not an opinion writer, but a reporter at CNN actually wrote that there is no consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth.
10.
Think about that. We'll discuss it when we come back. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of the program, is 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. Now, I got to tell you, the Biden administration, they are hiring a new person on their team. It's going to be a guaranteed Asian hire. It'll be the Secretary of Tokenism in the Biden administration. The Secretary of Tokenism is guaranteed to be someone from the AAPI community. That is the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Here's the White House press secretary.
First, we've had a range of conversations with Senator Duckworth since that call, which happened about a week ago, including a commitment to naming a high-level Asian American member of the AAPI community to a position in the White House. And that's something we're working to do through consultation with a range of officials and elected officials as well. And that person will be a commissioned officer and will be working on both policy and outreach. And as soon as we have a name, we will share that with all of you.
Secretary of Tokenism, we got to make them happy. We don't have enough people of this particular diverse background, so we got to add them. That reminds me, one thing that the Biden administration did, they added a chief of diversity and inclusion. Oh, friends, you can't make this one up. Representative Vern Buchanan has this on Twitter. A woke Pentagon, newly woke Pentagon under the Biden administration, has appointed the first ever chief of diversity and inclusion to oversee the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, and the rest of the special forces. Richard Torres Estrada was chosen to implement the new diversity plan, and then he wasn't. He had to be canned. Why? Well, it turns out he publicly called police racist. And he compared President Trump to Adolf Hitler. So this was their diversity and inclusion officer who was going to diversify the SEALs, Delta, Rangers, and the like. Dude never even made it one Scaramucci. It's so... Why do we need to... Shouldn't we worry about whether or not they're capable of killing people and being awesome? As opposed to whether or not we have enough box checks. The Secretary of Tokenism, that'll be the job of the Secretary of Tokenism. We will have a token Secretary of Tokenism to make sure that the Biden administration can signal its virtuous diversity and say, well, we don't have enough amputee, transgender, non-cisgendered people of the alphabet gang to be in the Navy SEALs. Who cares that they can fight China? We got a virtue signal. The power of virtue, it's greater than the power of the nuclear bomb, you know. This is where we're headed. Oh my goodness. China and Russia have got to be sitting back, and Iran too. They've got to be sitting back just rubbing their hands together with excitement and glee that this White House is more interested in the diversity of the SEALs than the fighting power of the Navy SEALs. And are we going to stop calling them SEALs? Because there are walruses too. And are we fat shaming people if we're just SEALs and not walruses? I mean, maybe we need to come up with a new acronym for the SEALs so that we don't fat shame the walruses or some such. This is where we are as a society. By the way, while all of this is happening, this hysteria over the racial violence, the media is now using the racial violence to also attack gun legislation. How dare they expand gun legislation? I meant to talk about this the other day. Listen to this framing, using Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's words, the framing of the story, how they want you to think about the story. It's very important. In the opening paragraphs of a lot of newspaper articles or in the opening words of a reporter, you can kind of get the sense of how they want you to think about the story. Let me give you one guess after you hear this. Opening sentence, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, opening framing of the story of gun rights legislation in the Georgia legislature. 2 weeks after 8 people were gunned down in 3 Atlanta area spas, the Georgia Senate approved legislation to loosen the state's gun laws. How do you think that this reporter wants you to think about the gun laws? Bo Hatchett of Cornelia says this is a Second Amendment protection bill that further recognizes Georgia's commitment to protect its citizens and their Second Amendment rights. It was a House piece of legislation on a party line vote. The fact that the vote came shortly after the spa shootings was something Democrats highlighted. Well, of course they would, and the media will helpfully go along with it, making that the introduction of the story. Now, the legislation would make it easier for travelers to bring their guns into the state of Georgia. And the Senate added a provision to it that will allow probate judges to process gun carry licenses and license renewals online. Right now, applicants have to go to court in person. The legislation also prohibits the governor from closing weapons manufacturers or shooting ranges during a public emergency. The Senate also voted to amend a piece of House legislation that would bar the governor from enacting any guidelines that specifically limit the practice of any religion during a declared state of emergency. Businesses and nonprofits also would be able to operate as long as they meet safe protocols established by the governor. That's thrown in there as well in this. But here's the thing. So you've got gun rights legislation. And by the way, it's not just Georgia. Tennessee lawmakers have yesterday passed legislation that would allow residents to open and conceal carry handguns without a permit. The governor is expected to sign the bill, and the media is attacking. The media is saying that this is all going to foster more racial violence. That how dare Tennessee let its... Now, can you imagine? Think about this. So the Second Amendment it's not just a constitutional right. It's a constitutional right that you can actually read within the Constitution. You can't read the abortion right in the Constitution. It does not exist in the Constitution. You cannot say, okay, turn to this section, this clause, this amendment, and you will see the right to kill children in the Constitution. It's not there. But turn to Amendment number 2, and you find the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But can you imagine the media? Well, you don't even have to imagine it. You see it all the time. When governors anywhere in the country want to pass any sort of legislation that does anything to abortion, oh, they want to restrict your right to an abortion. They want to restrict your right to an abortion. How could they do that? But when governors pass laws related to the Second Amendment, which you can actually find in the Constitution to make the right even more expressive. How can you do this? How can you let people exercise their constitutional right? How dare you do this? Isn't it funny how when it's the right to kill your kids through scissors and a vacuum, the media just can't imagine any restrictions whatsoever. But when it's the right to defend yourself with a gun that may lead to the death of another person, oh, well, no. See, what we need to do is maybe if they started figuring out a way to use a gun in an abortion, the media would suddenly be fine with Second Amendment right. How about that, huh? How about that? Now, you'd have to be really careful in how that's done because you don't want to harm the mother. But I mean, listen, every single time anyone across this country tries to do something with the Second Amendment that expands the right, the media goes ballistic. How can you do this? That right is in the Constitution. You yourself can find it. You can put your finger on. You can go to Washington, D.C., to the National Archives where the Bill of Rights is on display, and you can read it for yourself on the original piece of parchment. But you could stand there all day, every day for the rest of your life and never find the right to killing children in the Constitution. It's simply not there. I'm sorry, the right to an abortion. We're supposed to hide behind the euphemism. You're not going to find it there. Not only are you not going to find it there, you're going to find a lot of people who, how can you restrict this right? It's a right. It's a constitutional right. You can't restrict that right. Well, why are you people upset when we try to liberalize gun law? You can't do that. People could die. Well, duh. Oh, the hypocrites, they make it easy for us to, somebody told me this the other day. There's so much now that people on the right disagree with each other on. I could spend the rest of my life just doing 6 hours of radio a day on poking fun at the media and the left and the hypocritical double standards they have. And they're right. It's not my goal to do that. There's so much more in life, but there's so much material out there right now. We haven't even really gotten into the CNN story, and I'm not yet. I'm going to go to the phones first. 877-973-7425. John in Fayetteville, you're up next. Welcome.
Hey there.
What's going on?
You there?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to address the citizens arrest law that's about to be changed here.
Yeah.
Because my understanding is if I saw somebody injuring you and I tried to stop them, I would be arrested for kidnapping and the person would become the victim who actually hurt you.
No. I know that's circulating out there, but that's not actually true. The law specifically says it does not change or override the Good Samaritan law. And the Good Samaritan law is if you see someone actively engaged in harm to another or another person in distress, you are allowed to intervene.
I can intervene, but if I tried to detain them at that point, wouldn't they become the victim?
No, not under the law. So here's where the change is. What the change is there's a provision in the current citizens arrest law that is it says that you don't have to have witnessed the crime yourself. You could have reasonable knowledge that someone you see was engaged in the crime against another person or another person's property, and you can detain that person. So it's not you as an eyewitness. So what they're changing in the law's provision is that provision where now if you're a witness to the crime, you can stop the crime that you are witnessing, but you can't detain someone because you heard someone say that person was the actor involved in another crime. That makes sense to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, listen, I know what you're talking about because I've had several friends approach me on Facebook. There's some clips circulating, people upset about the changes. It's not actually, they're mischaracterizing it. It doesn't conflict with the Good Samaritan law, and you do have the right to detain someone if you see them actively involved in the commission of a crime against another person. Where this comes in, though, is that you yourself will be prohibited if you get wind of someone breaking into a house down the street. How on earth?
Okay, so I can't act as a local policeman, but I can be a good Samaritan.
Yes, you can be a good Samaritan, but you can't be a policeman. That's a good way to talk about it. Yeah, that's it. The other thing, John, is that if you're in a business and the business is being robbed or something, the people who are in the business can detain the person. This really has more to do with it. They're trying to change it. If you remember in the Ahmaud Arbery situation that gave rise to this crime, what the situation is, they did not know that Ahmaud Arbery had broken into this house. There was a rumor and a report that maybe it was him. And so after they detained him, they said, oh, well, we knew he was the guy who broke into a house, even though they hadn't seen the commission of the crime. And it turns out he hadn't broken into the house. That's it. So I hope that helps you.
Yes, excellent. I was a little concerned about that because, there's a difference between, going around policing your neighborhood and grabbing suspects because you're suspect as opposed to actually witnessing something. And that's what I was afraid of because if I witness something and I feel in my heart I should, intercede, I don't want to go to jail for it.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you won't under the legislation that they did make it. Okay, now, I will tell you this, though, John. The law as originally drafted would have done that, but they caught it and fixed it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help. I have, that was one of my concerns as well that John raised, and I'm glad to be able to, I'm glad they fixed it. So if under Good Samaritan laws now, you will be okay. You can intervene to help an immediate commission of a crime. The whole situation here and again, this goes back to the Ahmaud Arbery situation down in Brunswick. There was video of Ahmaud Arbery having entered into a property that was under construction, and all he did was look around, much like you or I may. If there's a house in our neighborhood, we go in, we look around. A rumor swirled he had stolen something. There was no evidence of it, and this father and son apparently decided to take matters into their own hands, and it led to Ahmaud Arbery's death. That is why the law is being changed. I think it's a fairly reasonable compromise, and it's passed pretty overwhelmingly in the House, and I think it's still in the Senate. I don't think it's been passed by the Senate yet.
You can follow Erick around social media.
You can be live on Erick's show by calling 877-97-ERIC. That's 877-973-7425.
This hour of the program is sponsored by First Liberty Building and Loan. If you are involved in the finances of your company or finances of business in general, and you need access to capital, credit, security, I'm talking six figures and higher, 100,000 and up, go to firstlibertyga.com. Spend 5 minutes with them. See if they're a good fit for you. FirstLibertyGA.com. They want to help your business become a big business. Go to FirstLibertyGA.com. I got to talk about this Matt Gaetz. Gates. I've always said Matt Gaetz, but it's Gates. I've seen people already. So he's been accused of being under investigation. By the way, it was the Trump administration that began the investigation. The Trump administration began an investigation into Matt Gaetz, allegedly over essentially carrying someone under 18 across state lines for the purposes of having sex. So he's being investigated for human trafficking. He's actually been tied to some guy down in Florida who's under investigation for human trafficking. Gaetz denies it. I see online that people are already suggesting Pizzagate as the phrasing for this. I have no idea. Here he is.
I know that there was a demand for money in exchange for a commitment that he could make this investigation go away along with his co-conspirators. They even claim to have specific connections inside the Biden White House. Now, I don't know if that's true. They were promising that Joe Biden would pardon me. Obviously, I don't need a pardon. I'm not seeking a pardon. I have not done anything improper or wrong. But what I am troubled by is the real motivation for all of this. You know, just tonight, Ted Lieu, a Democrat, is calling on me to be removed from the House Judiciary Committee And I believe we are in an era of our politics now, Tucker, where people are smeared to try to take them out of the conversation.
Okay, here's what we know. And by the way, the look on Tucker Carlson's face, Carlson, it's the most bizarre interview I've ever had. It was not actually, so the investigation was begun in the Trump administration. So for Gates to say that this person was offering a pardon from Biden when this was happening, Biden was not president when the investigation began. So we are led to believe. Now, there is a caveat here, multiple caveats. The story was first reported by the New York Times, so it could be a hit job. We shouldn't be surprised if it's a hit job, but we should also note that Gates, in his defense in the last 24 hours, has contradicted himself on multiple fronts. It's a very bizarre story. Tucker Carlson just looked is so perplexed last night on television. He looked so perplexed. The look on Carlson's face, and then Gates as well brought up instances of him with Tucker Carlson, and Carlson said he had no recollection of those, didn't know what Gates was talking about. Gates is a weird dude. And there was a story yesterday that he may be trying to get out of Congress to go be on Newsmax. Maybe his Newsmax effort is over with now. I have no idea. Let me rearrange the audio here. I'm doing this on the fly. I got to get this Tucker Carlson thing. This is just too good not to play for you.
You just saw our Matt Gaetz interview. That was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever conducted. That story just appeared in the news a couple of hours ago. And on the certainty that there's always more than you read in the newspaper, we immediately called Matt Gaetz and asked him to come on and tell us more, which, as you saw, he did. I don't think that clarified much, but it certainly showed this is a deeply interesting story, and we'll be following it. Don't quite understand it, but we'll bring you more when we find out. Well, countries like Japan.
Oh my gosh, that's the greatest thing ever. Poor old Tucker. Poor Tucker. Hang on.
You just saw our Matt Gaetz interview. That was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever conducted. That story just appeared in the news a couple of hours ago. And on the certainty that there's always more than you read in the newspaper, we immediately called Matt Gaetz and asked him to come on and tell us more, which, as you saw, he did. I don't think that clarified much, but it certainly showed this is a deeply interesting story, and we'll be following it. Don't quite understand it, but we'll bring you more when we find out.
It really was. It was nuts. So Gates says his dad was wearing a wire. It was an FBI agent who threatened to out him for human trafficking or some such. And so there's an FBI investigation into the Department of Justice people making a threat, but it was the Trump administration that did it, not the Biden administration, but they were going to pardon him with Biden. The whole thing is just really, really weird. Not as weird as what CNN did. I'll tell you about that when we come back. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson. It is my show. Surprise. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You know, I spend a lot of time these days in particular talking about truth and what is true. Because truth is a necessary thing. And too many times now, regardless of your politics, people get focused on my truth and your truth. Whose truth is the truth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem with that is oftentimes it's about confirmation bias. And what I think is true isn't really true, but it confirms everything I believe. So I'm going to say it's true. The left does this, the right does this. Well, we're taking it to new heights now. With Devin Cole. Devin Cole is a young hipster reporter from CNN. Devin Cole writes about politics at CNN, and he has written this piece. The headline, South Dakota's governor issues executive orders banning transgender athletes from women's sports. We'll get into the underlying story here, but I need to read this to you. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down. The fifth paragraph is one sentence, and it is that sentence on which we must dwell. Paragraph 1, South Dakota's Republican Governor Kristi Noem banned transgender girls and women from competing on women's sports teams at public high schools and colleges via a pair of executive orders issued Monday. The move, in paragraph 2, came after Noem angered conservatives by killing a bill that would have created similar prohibitions. In a news release explaining her veto at the time, Noem cited her concern that the bill would take the state's colleges and universities out of compliance with national rules, that it left both schools and students vulnerable to lawsuits over performance-enhancing drugs, and that it created an unworkable administrative burden on schools. Paragraph 3, Noem's conservative critics, including the editors of the National Review, accused her veto of being motivated by fear of expensive lawsuits and possible boycotts. Paragraph 4, though the two executive orders signed by Noem do not explicitly mention transgender athletes, they reference the supposed harm of the participation of males in women's athletics, an echo of the transphobic claim cited in other similar legislative initiatives that transgender women are not women. The orders also reference biological sex, a disputed term that refers to the sex as listed on students' original birth certificates. Now, I haven't even begun to unpack that paragraph because it's the next one, the single sentence, that is the most amazing. Are you ready for this? This is the single sentence paragraph 5 of this story by Devin Cole at CNN. It's not possible to know a person's gender identity at birth. And there is no consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth. It's not possible to know a person's gender identity at birth, and there is no consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth. Let's ignore the first clause of this 2-clause single sentence paragraph. It's not possible to know a person's gender identity at birth because, under the lefty lingo now, you can identify, even if you're a boy, you can identify as a girl, and you've got to make that choice. Let's focus on this one. This is the second clause. There is no consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth. Lefty lingo of the day is you're born male or female, but you get to decide whether you identify as male or female. What Devin Cole, the CNN reporter, is doing is going beyond even the left-wing transgender zeitgeist of the day to say you can't even determine the sex of a child at birth. Now, we can determine the sex of a horse at birth, We can determine the sex of a dog at birth. We can determine the sex of an elephant at birth. Somehow we can't determine the sex of a human being at birth. How is it, if we're all animals, how can we determine the sex of other animals at birth, but not human beings at birth? Now, this is anti-science. It is flat out anti-science. It is a statement of opinion of a young Gen Z reporter fresh out of college from CNN. I looked him up. He's only been out of college a couple of years. And he's saying something here as a statement of fact that is not only not factual, but also not scientific. And this is a network that has been telling us we've got to pay attention to science. Repeatedly on CNN now, we are prone to hear the voices of CNN tell us what is and is not science. We are prone to hear Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper and Chris Cuomo and Sanjay Gupta and Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper and you name it tell us what the scientific community says, what the scientific community believes. And here comes a CNN reporter to tell us that what we know to be scientifically true is not. What we know to be scientifically true is somehow no longer true. It is a well-settled science. And by the way, it's not even, I would say it's outside the realm of theory at this point. It is scientific fact that if a child has a Y chromosome, the child is a boy. Now, you're thinking, as some lefties do, what about intersex kids? Even in intersex kids are kids who they may have two X's and an XY. They're presumed, if there's the presence of an XY, to be leaning towards the masculine, even if they may have the traits of both. If there's a existence of a Y chromosome, the child is presumed a boy. If the child has the boy anatomical parts, it's presumed to be a boy. If they do not, presumed to be a girl. If there are two X chromosomes, it's a girl. Now, in the lesson, what about intersex? What they're trying to do is take the rare case, the exception, to discredit the rule. But the exceptions exist because there is a rule. Intersex is a thing because it is not common. And the commonality within biology is if you get a Y chromosome, you are defaulting to a boy. And even within those who are intersex, if there's the presence of a Y chromosome, you're considered boy. But why? See, what they want you to do is focus on the anomalous exception so that they can discredit the rule. But this guy's not even trying to do this. Let's back up one paragraph. The orders reference biological sex, a disputed term. Now, where does this go? He goes links to Boston Review. Boston Review is a political and literary forum. And he links to an article, Science Won't Settle Trans Rights. Appeals to the biological facts conceal a deeper contest over political equality and scientific authority itself. Here's the pull quote. There are raging controversies about whose science of sex and gender is correct, but these arguments raise an even more fundamental question. How do scientific facts get made in the first place? You see what we're doing here? We're undermining the very idea of science in order to build a case for transgenderism as a normal thing as opposed to a psychological thing. This is just postmodernism. It's an appeal to undermine the truth. But the biological sex is a disputed term, and he links to a political forum, not scientific literature. That in and of itself is a big tell there that he's making it all about politics. And who is the person who wrote the thing? Well, a Nancy Duke Lewis Professor of Biology and Gender Studies at Brown University. Not writing in a scientific journal, but a political forum. This is CNN, an institution that tells you to believe the science and follow the science and trust the science, basically telling you the science is bunk because this young reporter doesn't like it. That's not truth, it's opinion. And it's being characterized as truth because he wants to believe it, because he's a Gen Z person who, has bought into a cultural zeitgeist that is hostile to truth. And these are the people who are shaping the news. Now, let's focus on the underlying story. Kristi Noem has vetoed legislation, and the legislation would have prohibited colleges in South Dakota from allowing sports to have boys on girls' teams. She vetoed it, and then she issues an executive order that can be reversed by the next governor and isn't going to be enforceable, instead of having an actual law because she's afraid of lawsuits and claims that the lawsuit would do more harm than good. Kristi Noem, when she was in Congress, let me just be open and honest. Noem ran for governor of the state of South Dakota. She began using conservative statements to overshadow a rather moderate record in Congress. When Donald Trump became president, she started doing ads where she was hunting and she would shoot guns. And let's be honest, she's an attractive woman, female governor of South Dakota. And the young conservative men were like, she's awesome. She shoots guns. She looks good. She's going to be president 2024. Well, all of this was an image campaign that overshadows the substance. And the substance of Kristi Noem is actually fairly moderate establishment milquetoast Republican. And when it comes to picking culture war fights, Kristi Noem is willing to surrender to the left, as she has done here. And then she's screaming about cancel culture as if cancel culture is critics saying she's vetoed legislation that was good. That's cancel culture if you disagree with me. No, cancel culture is a real thing. But it's not a real thing when you are screaming about legislation that is good legislation that you vetoed because you're scared the NCAA may sue you. The NCAA are a bunch of bullies anyway, and you should be standing up to the NCAA, but you chose not to. The bad guys here are not the conservatives pointing out that you were a coward. The bad guys here are your advisors who convinced you needed to veto this, and it turns out that a couple of her advisors have vested interests in her vetoing this, one of which is on board a Chamber of Commerce that would love to have the NCAA bring tournaments to South Dakota. Well, there's an issue here we got to discuss when we come back about all the boycotts. You know, they want to boycott Georgia now, too. We'll get into all these things. But first, this NBC News story collaborating with Stacey Abrams to attack the state of Georgia.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. I had this piece up and then my browser crashed. Let me get the link back. Yes, here we go. I want to highlight for you biases in the media. I mean, we all know the media's biased, but oftentimes it's not what reporters say, but what they don't say or where they put things. This is a headline from NBC News, and this shows not only NBC News' willful collaboration with Democrats, but Stacey Abrams' involvement in pursuing a media narrative across the nation. Anti-Georgia media narrative. Here's the headline. New Jersey's Democratic governor signs early voting expansion, calls out Georgia. Governor Phil Murphy condemned sweeping restrictions enacted in Georgia last week in a bill signing event attended by voting rights advocate Stacey Abrams. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy signed into law Tuesday a bill instituting early voting at an event that sought to draw a contrast between his state and Republican efforts to curb access elsewhere. Today, New Jersey reminds the nation that our democracy is made stronger when we make it easier for the people's voices to be heard. Murphy, a Democrat, said in a Zoom ceremony surrounded by voting rights advocates, including Fair Fight founder Stacey Abrams. With a nod to Abrams, Murphy continued, "I cannot overlook that this early voting bill passed our legislature the same day that the governor of Georgia was signing a law restricting the rights of Georgians to vote, even making it a crime to give a voter waiting in line a bottle of water." Democrats control both chambers of the legislature in New Jersey. Abrams applauded the change and condemned states that have passed restrictions and those that are considering it. In-person early voting says to Americans who have to work on a schedule that isn't based on an agrarian economy from the 18th century that their voice matters. All right. Then you get a paragraph attacking Donald Trump, and then you get a paragraph Democrat and voting rights advocates have criticized the proposals as voter suppression and Republican power grabs. There is a restrictive and expansive election legislation under consideration in at least 43 states. So far, Georgia and Iowa have passed major restrictions. Republicans in Texas, Florida, and Arizona have advanced restrictive laws through committee hearings. Then there's one attacking Brian Kemp. All right, now, here we go. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then finally you get to it. Buried almost at the bottom of the story, it points out finally that Georgia has 17 mandatory days of early voting with 2 additional optional Sundays. And New Jersey only has 9 days. Georgia has 17 mandatory days of early voting, 2 additional Sundays that can be used for voting. Georgia's 17 mandatory days include 2 mandatory Saturdays. New Jersey will now have only 9 days of early voting. You had to get to the bottom of the NBC News story to note, in a story that uses Stacey Abrams and the Democratic governor of New Jersey to attack Georgia for having restrictive voting, early voting, that even with Georgia's restrictions, it's still more expansive than New Jersey. Also in New Jersey, you have to have not just a driver's license to register to vote, you got to have a bunch of other identifying information, including your social security number. So they're attacking Georgia. I mean, this is NBC News, by the way. It's not just Abrams and the New Jersey governor. This is NBC News collaborating by burying the truth at the very bottom of the story, past banner ads, past excerpts, past links to other stories. You got to go past all of that to get to the bottom, where they put up a tweet from Governor Brian Kemp noting that this is his tweet. Congratulations to the state of New Jersey on now having 9 days of early voting. Georgia has 17 mandatory days of early voting with 2 additional optional Sundays. They bury all of that at the bottom. Why? Because NBC News wants to carry water for Stacey Abrams and the Democrats and actually obfuscate the truth of the matter asserted. That's where media bias more often than not comes in. It obfuscates what's going on, or it doesn't tell you a story, as opposed to it tells you a particular story. It tries to cover up the truth to make the Democrats look better than they are and always attack Republicans. It's what we've come to expect, and this is why it's harder and harder for people to embrace media outlets and why it's harder for people to embrace and believe truth. How can they, when you've got the media out there willfully sabotaging the truth or stacking the deck against the truth in order to advance a Democratic narrative on things as opposed to just telling us what's going on? I, for the record, need you to note, I haven't seen it yet, but I really, 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 really want to see Godzilla versus King Kong. I may watch it after I'm done with Radio Day. I got all this time on my hands in the afternoon, except I said I'd go to the gym today. All right. We got to talk about, well, let me start here. I'm trying to figure out, I've gotten so far behind rambling on about this idiocy at CNN. The Biden administration, if you will recall, there was the story in Axios. Joe Biden, y'all, I got dad brain. Sorry. The kids are home for spring break. Got dad brain. Axios had that story. Team Biden, the Biden administration, Joe Biden, when his dog is not biting. Did you hear, by the way, Joe Biden's dog has bit someone else? They brought him back, and he's bitten someone else. I don't know what they're going to do with it. The dog is 3 years old, Major. Major sounds like he's a major pain in the rear for White House staff. The Biden administration, they invited in a bunch of historians. They wanted Joe Biden to know he's so awesome. Joe Biden, you need to go big or go home. Stop restraining yourself, Joe. Get rid of the filibuster. Don't let it stand in the way of history. This is history, Joe. Sorry, I inhaled the smell of the BS. These academic historians are a bunch of liberals who told liberal Joe Biden to be liberal. Go figure. The very same media outlets that are writing the stories of the academic historians telling Joe Biden to go big or go home will be the very same reporters who use the very same historians to talk about Biden's hubris later as he plots a big infrastructure plan. This is the headline for from Politico. Biden looks for an infrastructure win where Obama and Trump failed. The president will unveil a sweeping $2 trillion plan Wednesday focused on clean infrastructure and creating millions of jobs. Axios tells us what's in. He's calling it the American Jobs Plan. Now, if you will recall, Obama and Trump both had infrastructure weeks. Jobs and infrastructure and pivots. Where is this? I had this. Yeah, okay. I'm going to play this audio for you. Years ago, when Barack Obama was president, Barack Obama talked about jobs and infrastructure, and it was the Huffington Post that put this montage together. I've kept it all these years. It pays dividends to keep this. Listen to this montage.
It's the time to jumpstart job creation. That is what my economic agenda is designed to do. It's an agenda that begins with jobs.
We do have a jobs emergency. President Obama promised an unrelenting, unyielding, day-by-day effort by this administration.
An unrelenting, unyielding, day-by-day effort from this administration.
To fight for economic recovery on all fronts.
To fight for economic recovery on all fronts.
Relentless commitment to job creation.
I am not interested in taking a wait-and-see approach when it comes to creating jobs. What I'm interested in is taking action right now to help businesses create jobs right now. We don't have time for any more games. The American people didn't send us here to just think about our jobs. They sent us here to think about theirs. They want us to start worrying less about keeping our jobs and more about helping them keep their jobs. A lot of the debate in Washington has been around healthcare, so people think, well, I guess they must not be working on jobs. No, we've been working on jobs the whole time. Jobs must be our #1 focus in 2010. Saving and creating jobs have to continue to be our focus in 2010. We have to continue to work every single day to get our economy moving again. That means jobs. This is my administration's overriding focus. We will not rest until we are succeeding in generating the jobs that this economy needs. I'm not going to rest. My administration is not going to rest in our efforts to help people who are looking to find a job. Our big challenge right now is creating jobs and making sure the economy takes on.
Mr. President, I begin by applauding your decision to place the economy at the top of the agenda.
With everything else he has in his plate, his laser focus has been jobs, 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 jobs.
He's got a lot of things on his plate. He promised at one point that this year would all be about jobs, jobs, jobs.
Our number one focus has to be jobs, jobs, jobs.
Jobs, jobs, jobs.
I noticed the press yesterday, because we had this jobs forum in the White House, they said, Obama's finally pivoting to jobs.
Absolutely, they're going to pivot on to jobs, jobs, jobs.
Pivot onto the economy.
Hard pivot.
Hard pivot.
Tried to pivot.
Which was a very awkward pivot.
President Obama can pivot.
As if what we haven't been doing for the whole 9 months, from the day I was sworn in and we start talking about the recovery, was all about jobs. But, you know, folks' attention spans are short. I understand that.
The White House wanted this bill passed so you guys could pivot back to jobs. Is pivoting to jobs still the plan?
The president's been working on the economic recovery every day that he's been in office.
So has he already made the hard pivot to jobs, or are we still waiting for that to happen?
The president's been working on the economy since day one.
So this pivot to jobs has already, I mean, you talk about this
the
year,
president has
he was
been
going to make a big pivot to jobs.
And the president has,
are we still waiting?
No, the president's been focused on jobs. He works on jobs every day.
With the number of times that this White House has talked about making a strong pivot to jobs in the economy, is there any concern about pivoting away from jobs in the economy for the next 3 days in New York?
I've done this 100 times, but I don't know why I wouldn't do it 101st. The president's been focused on the economy and is focused on the economy and works on nothing more than he does on the economy each and every day.
I think we are past the crisis point in the economy, but we now have to pivot and focus on jobs and growth. My singular focus over the next 2 years is not rescuing the economy from potential disaster, but rather jump-starting the economy so that we actually start making a dent in the unemployment rate. I want to announce that the leaders of both parties in both chambers have reached an agreement that will reduce the deficit and avoid default. It will allow us to turn to the very important business of doing everything we can to create jobs. That's what we should be devoting all of our time.
That's okay. So now that you've heard that, 4 minutes long of jobs, jobs, pivot to jobs, jobs, jobs from the Obama administration. Every time Barack Obama would move to infrastructure, he would call it a jobs plan. And the reason the media kept coming back to this, are you pivoting to jobs, is today where we're going to focus on jobs, is he never used infrastructure, even though they could pass the Infrastructure Act, to ever create the jobs he claimed would be created. A lot of the money was pushed out a very long time. And now here comes Joe Biden, and the headline in Politico is a perfect setup for the clip you just heard. Biden looks for an infrastructure win where Obama failed. President Joe Biden will unveil a $2 trillion proposal Wednesday to transform America's infrastructure over the next 8 years, launching a mammoth legislative offensive to turn a long-running Washington punchline into a legacy-defining policy achievement in his first year in office. Biden will travel to Pittsburgh, where he will call for trillions of dollars in investments to rebuild the country's roads, bridges, and transit, improve access to clean water and broadband, expand access to elder and disability care, and revitalize American manufacturing. Now, what the heck does expand access to elder and disability care have to do with infrastructure? No one has any idea. As the White House puts it, the plan would affect how we move, how we live at home, how we care for one another, and how we manufacture. That caring for one another is all part of infrastructure. If passed, alongside an overhaul of the corporate tax system Biden's proposing, the White House says it would be paid for within 15 years. The sprawling package is the first part of what will be a two-pronged Build Back Better plan, the latter of which will include Democratic priorities on caregiving and improving wages for essential workers to be rolled out in mid-April. Together, the initiatives constitute a core component of the president's agenda, one expected to dominate the next several months as lawmakers debate its path forward. And pushing it through Congress will require Biden to pull off a second legislative victory, one that could either burnish his legacy or tarnish his record, just weeks after securing a $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package without a single Republican vote. Now, Axios gives us some proposals as they head here. There would be $621 billion for standard physical infrastructure, such as building roads and bridges and modernizing transit. The president will call on Congress to ramp up the use of electric vehicles and charging stations for civilians and the government, including electrifying school buses and the postal service fleet. There'd be $100 billion for expanding broadband internet access, $100 billion to update the electric grid, $213 billion for addressing economic inequality by modernizing buildings such as schools and VA hospitals. That spending would mobilize union trade workers to upgrade buildings. There'd be $400 billion in care infrastructure, $100 billion for workforce development. Between the lines within the package, the White House is proposing a tax overhaul. He intends to raise corporate taxes from 21 to 28% over 15 years. President Trump convinced Congress to lower it from 35 to 21. Joe Manchin has said that's a non-starter. To encourage corporations to conduct business in the U.S., the administration is proposing a global minimum tax and providing incentives to support onshoring. Among the tax hikes expected in the second proposal being rolled out next month is an increase in the top individual rate for those making more than $400,000 from 37% to the pre-Trump rate of 39.6%. The administration says it's going to be New Deal-style historic investment, not seen since the interstate highway system under Eisenhower or the space race of Kennedy. Here's the thing. The Democrats say they would use budget reconciliation to try to get this through, that they want the parliamentarian of the Senate to reconsider parliamentary decisions that they can only use it once a year. They want to try to use reconciliation to get it through on a simple 51-vote majority. But if there are tax increases, they're not going to do it. And you know what's buried in there? What the media is not telling you in the overview? Buried in Biden's infrastructure plan is a ban on right-to-work laws. It would uniformly get rid of states having non-union work rules. Georgia is a right-to-work state. You can be fired at will in Georgia, nor do you have to hire a union to work in Georgia. In some states, in Democratic states like Illinois and New York and in California, you are required in some cases to join a union. You're not allowed to work without joining the union, even if you don't want to join the union. What Joe Biden intends to do is ban any state's laws that say you don't have to join a union. It's a big sop to the union. This one is one reason, by the way, they're so desperate to raise the minimum wage, because many federal contracts that use union workforces set the union build laws and the pay rate based on the federal minimum wage. So if you raise the federal minimum wage, then union pay on contracts goes up. That's really why they want to raise the minimum wage. This is all a little bit hubristic. And by the way, Pete Buttigieg is now having to scramble. Buttigieg, he came out a couple weeks ago and said part of this infrastructure plan would be to add a mileage tax on Americans. Well, the White House has made Buttigieg go back out there and say, never mind.
You have said that you want to have it paid for, at least part of it, with either spending cuts or tax increases. It's possible that there's some moderate Democrats who won't support a raise in taxes, including Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey. He told Axios he's worried that tax increases could theoretically slow the economic recovery. He said, quote, "We need to be careful not to do anything that's too big or too much in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis," unquote. As of right now, is raising taxes on wealthier Americans the primary funding source for your plan?
Well, you're going to hear more details from the administration in the coming days about how to pay for this. But one thing I will do is reiterate the president's commitment that his proposals will not raise taxes at all on anyone making under $400,000 a year.
So nobody who makes under $400,000 a year will see a tax increase. You said also that a mileage tax showed, quote, a lot of promise as a way to help pay for the plan. That tax would charge people for how many miles they drive. Is that under consideration?
No, that's not part of the conversation about this infrastructure bill. So just want to make sure that's really clear. But you will be hearing a lot more details in the coming days about how we envision being able to fund this. And again, these are carefully thought through, responsible ideas that ultimately are going to be a win for the economy and need to be compared to the unaffordable cost
of the status quo.
Right. So we're going to raise taxes on the rich, and we'll put off the mileage tax until later. This is a walk back by Buttigieg, who got out over skis, but the White House is okay, basically trotting him out and saying, yeah, we're going to raise taxes on rich people. We're not going to do a mileage tax. We'll just raise taxes on rich people. It's always acceptable to think about raising taxes on rich people until you realize what actually happens is it's a middle class tax cut, and they decide if you make over $50,000 a year, guess what? You're rich. Congratulations. Pay more taxes.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson.
Well, you got to give it to old Ed Bastain, the CEO of Delta. Clever Ed. This is breaking news happening now. Delta Airlines CEO condemns the Georgia election reform package. Oh my gosh, this is great. So you got calls for boycotting Delta because Delta has not spoken up. So the law's passed, it's going to be enacted, and now Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastain said Wednesday the Georgia voting legislation signed into law last week was unacceptable and based on a lie of widespread fraud in last November's election. In a memo to employees, he also said the new voting restrictions will make it harder for underrepresented voters, particularly black voters, to exercise their constitutional right to elect representatives in the state. I need to make it crystal clear that the final bill is unacceptable and does not match Delta's values, Bastain said in the memo. The sharply worded statement comes as Delta and other Georgia companies face threats of boycotts from opponents of voting restrictions who say local corporations like Delta should have done more. Delta earlier this month made carefully worded statements calling for a fair, secure elections process, but did not voice opposition to the legislation. After the legislation was signed by the governor, the airline issued a statement Friday that appeared to defend it because it was less restrictive. After having time to now fully understand all that is in the bill, coupled with discussions from leaders and employees in the black community, it's evident that the bill includes provisions that will make it harder for many underrepresented voters, particularly black voters, to exercise their constitutional right to elect their representative. That is wrong. The entire rationale for this bill was based on a lie, that there was widespread voter fraud in Georgia in the 2020 election. That is simply not true. Unfortunately, that excuse is being used in states around the country that are attempting to pass similar legislation to restrict voting rights. Bastain added that Delta will work with political leaders on the matter and monitor legislation in Congress. This is so well done. So on Friday, if you miss this, this is politics. Delta came out with a statement before the law was passed and said, we're concerned about the potential ramifications of particularly the Senate bill that would have restricted absentee voting and other things. So the governor passes a law that doesn't include the things Delta objects to. Delta releases a statement last Friday saying progress was made and the bill was improved before signing it into law. Well, Stacey Abrams, Fair Fight, and others are out to get Delta as a result of Delta having said that the final laws passed was better than it was originally considered. So now the CEO of Delta comes out with a statement after the law has been passed and signed by the governor and says, oh, this law is terrible. We can't believe they would do such a thing. How dare they do this? The law's passed. There's nothing they can do to stop it now. Their voice could have been used ahead of time, but they kept silent, let it pass, and now they'll claim outrage upon outrage. How dare they do it? They'll embrace the left-wing talking points about voter suppression, even though it's not true. Now, will the activists stop boycotting Delta? That's the question. Will they show any forgiveness? You know, Boko Haram tends to show no grace. Will they still punish Delta because Delta waited until the bill was signed into law? And remember, after it was signed into law, they actually praised it. And now they're walking it all back and saying, oh, upon further consideration, this law is terrible. How dare they pass it? The wokes are coming for Delta. They got to do something. You got to feel bad for them. Not really. What's actually really interesting here is that Stacey Abrams is trying to wreck Georgia's economy because she doesn't like the law. And is that patriotic? Is that good for a potential gubernatorial candidate to want to destroy Georgia's economy because she doesn't like a law? Really? Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you like to be a part of this here program, it's 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Oh, a spam risk is calling my cell phone. Did you know, by the way, this will be my measure of public service. AT&T and Verizon, I think T-Mobile Sprint does as well. They have apps you can download to your Android or Apple phone, your iPhone, and it's a call thing where when they check every call that comes in, and if it's part of a database of spam or whatnot, it'll, instead of showing you the number or who's calling and where it's from, it just says spam risk. And so a spam risk is calling me. Now, once, I should note, once I got a spam risk call and it actually was a legit phone call. But every other time it's been good. The spammers are continuing to call to tell me about my extended warranty. I think one of the greatest cartoons I've seen of late was Alexander Graham Bell making the first phone call. And when he talks down the line, "Can you hear me?" the voice back says, "Yes, your extended warranty may be expired." Oh my goodness gracious! All right, we must move on. We must discuss other issues. We got to talk about education. Have y'all heard this video? This is outrageous. At a time of critical theory out there and this obsession with white supremacy, making it sound like every race attack in the country is white supremacy. The New York Times failing to even report the race of the attacker of the Filipino woman. They have reported her race, but not the race of the attacker because it wasn't a white dude. In Virginia, this high school teacher was caught on video berating a student for not acknowledging race during a lecture.
The story behind this picture, I'd rather hold on to that. Just tell me what this seems to be a picture of.
It's just two people chilling.
Right, just two people. There's nothing more to that picture?
Nah, not really. Just two people chilling.
I don't believe that you believe that. I don't believe that you look at this as just two people. I don't think
Truly
you
is just two people, though, is it not?
Yeah, but I think you're being intentionally coy about what this is a picture of.
What would I be being coy about? It's two people standing back to back in a picture.
Yeah, and that's all you see is two people.
I'm confused on what you would like me to speak on in that sense.
I don't think you are. I don't know why you do this. I'm not trying to call you out, but you come out off of mute to talk about what this is a picture of, and you act as if there's nothing noticeable about this apart from the fact that there's two people.
Well, I'm confused. Are you trying to get me to say that there are two different races in this picture?
Yes,
is that what you want me to say? Well, at the end of the day, wouldn't that just be feeding into the problem of looking at race instead of just acknowledging them as two normal people?
No, it's not, because you can't look at the people and not acknowledge that there are racial differences, right?
But if we're going for, let's say if we're looking for equality within all this, then why would we need to point out things such as that?
Because those differences are real things.
You will recall it was not 2 years ago that we were told that when police officers put race in descriptions of suspects that they were being racist. When a police officer says a 6 foot tall individual held someone at gunpoint, officers are looking for a 6 foot tall individual. If they said it was a 6 foot tall male, black male, well, that was bad. That was bad. And that you weren't allowed to say that. If you believe that they should be able to say it was a black male, you were racist. And now here comes a young man who records, it's a Virginia high school teacher who insists that his student describe the races of the individuals in a picture. That you can't not describe it. We can't head to a colorblind society. Teachers in this country are just, our kids are being polluted by the insanity of left-wing teachers. Out in California, there's a different issue. This is a San Diego County supervisor talking about what's happening there with the education of kids. This is equally bizarre.
They're keeping these. I understand there was about 20 the unaccompanied minors tested positive. They're being quarantined, my understanding, within the convention center. So they're separated from the other 500 that are there right now. And we are expecting about another 250 to come within the next day or so. And this is all a direct result of, just allowing our borders to be crossed uninhibited and having such a, glut of humanity, I guess, at the Texas and Arizona borders. These undocumented children are being flown into San Diego Airport from Texas. I think they're being bused from Arizona, and as a site to house these. And what we have actually are teenage girls, aged 13 to 17, that are at the convention center right now. We anticipate getting up to 1,500. But you're right, the Office of Education is sending teachers over for in-person classroom training. Our own kids here in San Diego County, can't get in-person training, but here are these migrants who actually, I'm glad they're getting that educational opportunity, but so should our kids that, they've been waiting over a year to get back into school.
Yeah, let's break this down. His audio quality, he was on a Zoom call, TV interview, was a little bit nuts. I shouldn't say nuts, it's just garbled a little bit. Migrant children have been moved to San Diego to relieve the situation at the Texas border, and teachers are doing in-person learning for the migrant children. And San Diego's own American citizen children are not allowed to have in-person learning. Yeah, my silence is intentional here. In Virginia, you've got a kid being berated by his teacher for not recognizing race. In San Diego, you've got immigrant illegal alien children getting in-person learning. But are the teachers going to woke up the kids? Are the teachers, are they going to be indoctrinating or educating the kids? Maybe it's actually, I'm beginning to think it might be a real blessing that kids can't go to school in this country anymore, given what's happening in these government-run schools. In Northern Virginia, the superintendent of schools, if you missed the story, I mentioned it yesterday, in Northern Virginia, the superintendent of schools has moved his kid to a private school and won't reopen schools for parents. In fact, they were going to reopen schools, and then the teachers decided, we don't really want to go back this year, so they're not going to open the school system for kids. Kids won't be able to go back to school this year in Northern Virginia or in San Francisco. They're not going back in San Francisco either. And in fact, a third of students in the San Francisco school system are Asian. And the vice president of the San Francisco School Board, it's now come out, attacked Asians of perpetuating white supremacy by voting for Donald Trump. That the Asian community needed to essentially be condemned for perpetuating white supremacy. The intersectionalists are going to eat each other. This is the most bizarre thing we're experiencing in this country right now is Boko Haram. It goes after each other, let alone everybody else in society. The wokes consume each other. The wokes are out to get everybody. And it's just, it's a really weird thing to just stand back and watch as they consume each other. When they're not indoctrinating your kids, they're coming out to get each other. They're playing against each other. It's like, I've talked about the Lord of the Rings before, and in the Lord of the Rings, which Peter Jackson really captures from the books, the forces of Mordor are as nasty to each other as they are the good people, and they only attack the good people, or they only go after each other when there are no good people around. But the moment the good people disappear, they start going after each other. And we see this with Boko Haram in coastal areas now. The liberals in San Francisco are up in arms about the liberals in San Francisco making race-based attacks on liberals in San Francisco. None of it seems to make any sense. And yet that's where we are as a society in this country right now. The wokes are run amok, and it's coming out and becoming a issue in schools. I don't know if you guys have heard, Pfizer has announced overnight that it has a 100% effectiveness rate in teenagers. The Pfizer vaccine for COVID has a 100% effectiveness rate. Between kids between 12 and 15. In Georgia now, your kid can get the vaccine if they're 16 and over. And now Pfizer is saying the Pfizer vaccine has a 100% effectiveness rate in preventing COVID-19 in children 12 to 15 with minimal side effects and no long-term issues relating to pregnancy, things like that, for kids. I don't know how they know that part, but there you have it. And so kids can get the vaccine now. High school kids can certainly get the vaccine, and yet teachers' unions don't want to go back to school even as they're getting the vaccine. Remember, here in Georgia, teachers made a big deal about Governor Kemp not expanding the pool of people who could get covered. In large part, he did it because there wasn't enough vaccine to go around. Well, now there is enough vaccine to go around, and they're giving it to teachers. And in some urban parts of the state, in public school systems, they still don't want to open the schools. They still don't want to do it, which is kind of remarkable. They are willfully, if anything, they are willfully disregarding the science just so they don't have to work. And that's part of the problem, is it's all about work now. But again, I'm starting to think it may be a good thing, because I'm more and more concerned about these public schools, not necessarily in Georgia, but some of them in Georgia, indoctrinating the kids. There's more and more indoctrination of kids going on in this country in public schools. They're not teaching so much as woking the kids up. And we need far fewer woke kids in this country. The number of kids, even in my kids' school, that are being impacted by culture, and my kids go to a conservative Christian school that reflects our values, and the number of kids there and in other faith-based schools that I encounter in Georgia who are defying biblical sexual orthodoxy, transgenderism, stuff like that. There's something in the water in society right now. It's not very helpful, and I guess maybe it's a study of the end times. There's some eschatology that could wake us up to what's going on here. But the whole thing is crazy, and it's fed by the left-wing teachers in public government-run schools now, and by reporters like the dude at CNN who believes that it's impossible. There's no scientific consensus on determining the sex of a child at birth. A reporter actually reported that there's no scientific consensus on determining the sex of a child at birth in this country. With kids like that coming out of our government education and private school systems, we got huge problems as a society.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now.
It's me. Welcome. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. My goodness. I'm seeing the reaction from people I put up on Instagram. No consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth from CNN, and I'm getting notes from even a few people who work at CNN who are just horrified that showed up there. All right, I gotta spend a moment here. Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola, two of Atlanta's biggest brands, are facing consumer boycott threats after Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed a new voting restriction into law last week. Social media posts carry the hashtag boycott Delta Airlines, boycott Coca-Cola, proliferated on Twitter as critics of the Republican legislation accused the two Atlanta-based companies of not having done enough to stop its passage. Which reminded me of that audio the other day of Raphael Warnock when Dana Bash from CNN confronted him with the logic of his rhetoric, and he tried to obfuscate around it.
Georgia-based corporations like Coca-Cola and Delta are facing intense criticism for not doing more to publicly oppose this law. Organizations like the PGA, the MLB are also under pressure to move high-profile events like the Masters and the All-Star Game out of your state of Georgia. Does corporate America need to be more forceful in denouncing this law? Should boycotts be on the table?
I think we all have to use our voices. And I have to tell you, as the pastor of Ebenezer Church, I've seen these corporations falling over themselves every year around the time of the King holiday, celebrating Dr. King. And yes, I think that the way to celebrate Dr. King is to stand up for what he represented, voting rights. And so we will see how all of that plays out. But I'm focused on what we can do in the United States Senate. We have a responsibility to make sure that we secure the franchise. And when we do that, we protect the democracy. And I think also we set the climate for business. We want to see people prosper, particularly who have been suffering for months under this pandemic. We need to pass this legislation, protect the right of the people to be heard in their own democracy, and to make sure that Georgia is open for business and open for voting.
So no boycotts?
Listen, I'm not focused on that. I am focused on what I can do as a United States Senator.
He's dodging around it, but notice that Raphael Warnock, he's not saying don't boycott. You've got the head of the AME Church in Georgia, the bishop in charge of the AME Church, is calling for boycotts of Georgia businesses. So we're going to put black residents of Georgia out of work through boycotts, even though they overwhelmingly support photo ID, because progressive activists don't like photo ID. And that, let's not kid ourselves, that's what this is actually about. They don't like the photo ID requirement. They don't like it. Everything in here is fairly reasonable. And with its reasonableness, the Democrats have very few arguments. And so they're having to scream about race and racism in the conduct of the law and in the passage and implementation of the law without actually engaging in the substance of the law. Here is Stacey Abrams.
New Jersey has been leading the way with automatic voter registration, with having the foresight and the humility to understand that redemption for those who come out of our prisons and jails must include a reintroduction into the full measure of citizenship. As someone who's not only fought for voting rights, but has been working hard on the census, your actions taken to address prison gerrymandering are crucial, because we cannot build a stronger society if we do not include the needs of every person. And that's the fundamental premise of democracy. Not that we get everything we want, but that we deserve to have a say in the direction of our nation, in the direction of our states, and in the direction of our communities. And when democracy is undermined by laws that we have seen pass, not only in Georgia, but in Iowa, and laws that are under consideration in Arizona, in Texas, in New Hampshire, in Florida. In 43 states across this country, we are seeing an onslaught, an attack on democracy.
An attack on democracy, an onslaught. Really? An attack on democracy. Stacey Abrams, that was her audio where she's praising New Jersey for expanding or actually starting early voting. New Jersey only just today or just yesterday signed into law, the governor there did, a law to have early voting. Prior to yesterday, there was no such thing as early voting in New Jersey, and New Jersey will only give 9 days. I frankly think, so today is the last day the Georgia legislature is meeting. I think what the Georgia legislature should do is rush through today a very simply worded piece of legislation that calls it the New Jersey Compromise.
30.
That we will only have 9 days of voting because that's what New Jersey did, and Stacey Abrams likes it. That can be what the law says, that you 9 days because Stacey Abrams said that was good for New Jersey, so we'll do that as well. And see what Stacey Abrams says about that one, huh? Maybe. Hello there, folks. It is time to remind you about the Omaha Steaks Butcher's Bestsellers package. In fact, I'm going to do this one for you, and the reason I'm going to do it for you is because, well, every time I go, I find something else. Like, I smoked a brisket that I got from Omaha Steaks a while back. If you go and you put Georgia, there's a search bar up at the top. You'll see the E. Erickson News Network, ENN. Continue to the exclusive offer, and what you get is the Butcher's Bestsellers. Now, you get 4 Butcher's Cut fillets, 4 boneless chicken breasts, 4 boneless pork chops, 4 Omaha steak burgers, 4 kielbasa sausages, 4 potatoes au gratin, 4. And by the way, they make them. They're like they use like little like muffin cups or something. They're individual potatoes au gratin. It's not like a big casserole thing. It's actually really nice the way they do it. You get 4 caramel apple dollars. You get their signature seasoning. You get, if you order it now, free 4 extra boneless chicken breasts. So 2 pounds of chicken, 1 pound for free, and you get 4 more Omaha steak burgers. The steak burgers are great. Use the Blackstone, make smash burgers with them. I haven't used my Blackstone. I need to get it out and use it. So it's the Butcher's Bestsellers. You can go on. You can add extra, like you can add their chicken fried steaks. You can add gourmet jumbo franks. You can add their meatballs. Their meatballs are incredible. I love meatball sandwiches, and I use Omaha Steaks for those. Go to omahasteaks.com right now. Put Georgia. Again, you put Georgia in the search bar, and you'll get this deal right now for a limited time. You're going to get 4 boneless chicken breasts and 4 Omaha steak burgers. And you're going to get 51% savings. I see on the website as I'm looking at this. You need to go to Omaha Steaks. Listen, Easter's coming up this weekend. You can get this in time for Easter if you act today. You can get this great package from Omaha Steaks. You can get it here for the weekend. You can grill up for your family on Easter Sunday, but you got to order today for sure if you want even a chance of getting it by Easter. So go to omahasteaks.com and put Georgia in the search bar. Incredible value, incredible deal. They have so much more there. The seafood, the lobster tails, my goodness, the twice baked potatoes as well. There's so much good stuff there. omahasteaks.com. Okay, a listener, a fine, good listener sent us the Ed memo. Ed Bastain to Delta colleagues worldwide. As if the Delta colleagues in China, they're real concerned about it. Notice Delta hasn't spoken up about China. Delta flies to China, hasn't said anything at all about the changes to what's happening in Hong Kong. Just 2 weeks ago, we honored civil rights icon Andrew Young by naming a building on our campus in his honor and establishing a permanent exhibit to his lifelong work in the lobby. The building was chosen because it's the first place most new Delta employees visit when they come to work for us, and we wanted them to see on their first day just how closely our mission of connecting the world intertwines with the work of heroes like Ambassador Young, a former Delta board member whose steady hand helped save our airline in the dark years following 9/11. For all the pride we take in the achievements of Ambassador Young and other civil rights heroes, many of them from our hometown of Atlanta, we know that much work remains to be done to truly establish a just and equitable society. Last week, the Georgia legislature passed a sweeping voting reform act that makes it harder for many Georgians, particularly those in the black and brown communities, to exercise their right to vote. How exactly do they do that? He doesn't say. Since the bill's inception, Delta joined other major Atlanta corporations to work closely with elected officials from both parties to try and remove some of the most egregious measures from the bill. We had some success in eliminating the most suppressive tactics that some had proposed. However, I need to make it crystal clear the final bill is unacceptable and does not match Delta's values. I'm comfortable saying this now that the legislation has passed and been signed into law, and there's no way we can stop it. Well, I may have made that last part up. The right to vote is sacred. It is fundamental to our democracy, and those rights not only need to be protected, but easily facilitated in a safe, and secure manner. And there's no safer way to do it than getting rid of the signature verification portal and instead using photo ID for absentee ballots, but I can't say it. This is actually really funny when you think about it. Delta Airlines refuses to say anything except nice stuff when the bill is signed, and then there's blowback from the activist community and now has to condemn the bill that on Friday they were praising. It's kind of poetic for them. Now, here's the thing, though, that you got to pay attention to. Increasingly, what the left is doing, something the right does not do, is mobilize the Fortune 500 for woke values. The Fortune 500 is way more concerned about Boko Haram than it is about Christians. Delta is way more concerned about the wokes than it is about the Chinese. But concerned enough about the Chinese, Delta won't say anything about the Chinese. Delta is far more concerned about the wokes than Republicans or conservatives or anyone else, because the wokes will actively try to destroy their business. Now, I don't think this is an invitation for conservatives to engage in that. Our ways aren't their ways. I don't think our ways should be their ways. For example, Amazon there's a union vote in Alabama for Amazon. Whether or not Amazon workers in a distribution fulfillment place in Alabama should be unionized. And I want to call them post-conservatives. Right-wing activists who are not conservative, they're post-conservative. Essentially, they're saying, well, yeah, Amazon needs to be unionized. And it's not really because of worker rights, it's to punish Amazon. Because Amazon is on the left and Amazon facilitates Boko Haram. And so the idea of the post-conservative right is we're going to punish people and we're going to behave like the wokes behave. Now, they're looking at the effectiveness of the wokes and getting Delta to come out and condemn this policy from Atlanta. But what did Delta actually do? What did Delta actually do? Delta waited until after the law was signed into law and then actually praised the compromises made. And then when the wokes got mad, issued a statement condemning the law. And isn't going to do anything to stop the law or fight the law. They name drop Delta's CEO, name drops John Lewis, and name drops Andrew Young, and says how sorry he is the law went into effect, but doesn't actually do anything to fix the law. At some point, we need to recognize, and the left surely does recognize, that some of this is performance. It is necessary performance, and they've got to do it to keep the wokes from destroying their business. And I would submit to you, those of us on the right, we have a secret weapon. And it is a weapon the left lacks and cannot deploy. And that is the weapon of grace. The weapon of grace, it burns through those who have no grace. Proverbs talks about it like heaping coals on someone when you're nice to them. I think we got to show some grace and understanding. There's no reason to go after Delta for issuing this statement. Now, had Delta joined the wokes ahead of time and tried to stop this law, then yes, there's a time to stand up. But now, if nothing else, kind of laugh at them for doing what they're doing. Kind of laugh at them and point out that this is all performance on Delta's part. But also to understand that it is a necessary reaction to Delta because Delta's got to deal with these wokes. Boko Haram is the most dangerous force in the United States right now. They would like to tell you that white supremacy and Christians are the most dangerous group in America right now. There are those right now who say we should. I saw somebody on Twitter earlier say we need to cancel the Republicans. If you oppose cancel culture, then you should cancel the GOP. Why? Because then all the dissenting voices will be canceled, and in so canceling them, you won't have any cancel culture anymore. Yes, once all the people who need to be canceled are canceled, there will be no cancel culture. So get rid of the Republican Party, which stands in the way of cancel culture. That's essentially the logic. It is the logic of the mob. They talk about white supremacists and what a danger white supremacy is in the country. And white supremacy, the rise of militant white supremacists, is a danger in this country. It is. But the left talks about that to minimize. I mean, the left can't even admit Antifa is a threat. Their side never is a threat. But the reality is this. The wokes are a dangerous, dangerous threat because one of the chief dangers on the planet is the eradication of freedom of thought and speech. It is what every left-wing totalitarian regime, from the Nazis to the communists, have done. They have silenced anyone who might dissent. And in so doing, they control the mind. And control of the mind is what the left wants. It's why they don't like dissent. It's why they don't like Christians being able to speak in the town square. It's why they don't like conservatives being able to stand up and contradict them. It's why they demand that the Fortune 500 be on their side and be taken captive so that they can shut down the revenue streams to conservatives. Remember, it was only a few years ago that General Motors would advertise on conservative radio. And General Motors wanted to get out of conservative radio because the wokes were constantly bullying General Motors for daring to advertise on Sean Hannity's show or Rush Limbaugh's show. They used the excuse of the Sandra Fluck comment Rush Limbaugh made to get out of conservative radio. And it was all to placate the wokes. Really had nothing to do with anything else. They wanted to get out. They wanted to placate the wokes. It was their way out. The left weaponizes revenue streams. They boycott advertisers. Harry's Razors used to be an advertiser of mine. And Harry's Razors ditched me because the wokes came after Harry's Razors, which has gone all in on progressive woke speak. Harry's, which advertises a line of razors for men and one for women, wants you to believe there are no differences between genders. And Harry's won't advertise on conservative radio. I, by the way, am a Harry's customer because I like their razor blades. I'm not going to boycott them. There is something to be said about showing some grace to these companies who are in difficult positions. Now, some people on the post-conservative right, the non-Christian right, will say, well, you're just surrendering. You're just surrendering. You got to do just like them. Look, I'm a Christian. I love my neighbor. It's sometimes hard, but also showing grace to these people. I have discovered there are a couple of businesses that I shop with, and it infuriates those businesses to no end that I shop with those businesses. And I think I'm not going to name them. I don't want to name and shame them, but there are a couple of companies here in Georgia that I talk about, I frequent, and I praise. And it makes them livid to no end that I do that. And they don't want to come out and say anything because all I'm doing is praising their product. But man, do they hate it. I've been told specifically by people at the company that their ownership despises me and the fact that I say nice things about their businesses. And all I'm doing is saying, hey, they got a great product. Go shop there. And to some degree, I think we should keep doing that. And this isn't so much a boycott, but go find the businesses you like that offer you good products and give your money to them. You don't have to, well, if you're in Georgia, you pretty much do want to use Delta because they're the best. You don't have to go out of your way, though, for a company to praise the company that has been hijacked by the wokes. You don't have to use Harry's Razors. If you don't want to, but go just find something you use, like it, and tell the world about this great product. That's part of what the wokes are doing is these companies perceive that it's the wokes who are their customer base, and they really don't know any better. So you go shop and you make it known you like this product, they're going to be less likely to want to side with the wokes. But while you're just not boycotting them and they're getting all their money from the left, of course of course they're going to stand with the side that gives them the most money. It's a financial decision for a lot of these companies. Delta, of course, understands that in Georgia, Georgia is still a largely conservative state. And so Delta, it's got to stop the boycotts by coming out now and saying this law is bad. But Delta waited until after the law was passed to say anything. Why? Because Delta knows how the game is played, and we should show them some grace for being smart enough to understand they got to go through a dog and pony show when they can't stop the inevitable.
News and in-depth analysis.
Hello there. All right. Reminder on Thursday, Tim Keller is going. I'm sorry, not Thursday, Friday. My days are all muddied here. Gosh, it's already Wednesday. Tim Keller is going to join me on Friday. He's got a great new book out, Hope in Times of Fear, The Resurrection and the Meaning of Easter. It really is just a phenomenal read. And if you're looking for something to read for Holy Week, it's a great read. It's not hard to fly through this book. And, you know, going back to my earlier point on us offering grace, on the people on the right offering grace, I'm reminded of something he says in his book, that he was alive during the civil rights era. He distinctly remembers Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. They were grounded in the rhetoric of Christendom, and that they had a hope to them. There was a real hope in Martin Luther King and the early civil rights leaders' statements. And here now, there really is no hope. They don't offer hope. There's just condemnation, and it is somewhat sad. And he talks about, I want to talk to him on Friday about that, the level of hope and how he views hope. He talks about that a lot in the early chapters in his book, on just the hope we have, and that hope is a real intangible thing. Kyle Harper, a historian, has written on ancient pandemics. He was interviewed and asked about how Christianity kept thriving and growing in the bleakest of these times, and he said, for Christians, it was a positive program. This life was always meant to be transitory and just part of a larger story. What was important to the Christians was to orient one's life toward the larger story, the cosmic story, the story of eternity. They did live in this world, experienced pain, and loved others, but the Christians of that time were called to see the story of this life as just one of the stories in which they lived. The hidden map was the larger picture. The hidden map, the Christian hidden map, went far beyond ordinary religious consolations. For example, other religions spoke of the uncertain possibility of a better hereafter if our moral performance was sufficient. The Christian hope exceeded such quivering, wishful thinking in every way. The biblical word elpida, translated as the weaker English word hope, means profound certainty. Christians view even the hardest circumstances as part of a history guided by God at every turn toward not merely some kind of afterlife, but toward the resurrection of our bodies and souls into new remade heavens and earth. And all this hope or profound certainty centers on one explosive event, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is what Christianity offers a world that has lost hope, that has lost profound certainty. We see this reflected in the writings of the postmodern era. We see this in the CNN story that there's no certainty in biological sex, that their biological sex is a controversial idea when it's not. There is no more profound certainty in the world. When you hear people talk about deconstructing or deconstructing their faith, what they're doing is they're raising their doubts into truth, and they're discrediting the truth by doubting it. They reverse the world around them. The exception to the rule becomes the rule, and the rule itself comes into doubt when that happens. I think we've got to live our life with way more grace, not just because Scripture says love your neighbor, but because grace is going to be what gets us out of these problems. When you and I are happy warriors and we're faced with the angry wokes, the world around us will tend to side with us, even if they can't do it publicly. I mean, like at Delta right now, I know conservatives who work at Delta who are afraid to speak up. But they then encounter other people within the office who they just assume were wokes. And it turns out those people, too, are afraid to speak up, and they go to the polls and they vote for people like Donald Trump. I don't think that the wokes realize that their behavior is what could get Donald Trump elected again in 4 years. Donald Trump is going to head to the border and basically run an I told you so campaign. And as the Democrats begin to raise taxes and spark inflation and cause an economic recession, Donald Trump is going to be able to run in 2024 on an I told you so campaign if he chooses to run. Now, I'm not sure he's going to run. Maybe he won't. There are lots of other people who want to. Ron DeSantis himself wants to run. Ron DeSantis, I think, would be formidable if he runs. My goodness, there are so many people out there right now who are trying to attack Ron DeSantis. I don't know if you heard the story that the New York Times says, well, it turns out even more people died in Florida than we thought. Well, of course they're going to come out and do everything they can to stop DeSantis and bash him and stop him. I think he's probably the front runner in 2024 if Donald Trump doesn't run. Not that he's going to be the guy. There may be someone else.
Credit score.